We're back for the preview show. Myself, Ian O'Neill, and Harry Powell in the hot seat tonight to discuss the latest UFC installment, Harry, and that is a fairly poor card overall. We are slated to have Vicente Luque and Rafael dos Anjos compete in the main event. A couple of other fights going on throughout that card as well. Harry, not even my favorite fighter ever to fight in Everland that I ever watched before, Vicente Luque, can get me excited for this one. But we've been saying it. We've been pretty kind to UFC cards lately, and I can't say we can be all too kind for this to this one. I mean, normally with these fight night cards, you know, you have somewhat of an intriguing main event. And look at Rafael dos Anjos, the legend in his own right, up at 170. He's coming off a win over Brian Barberena. Vicente Luque somewhat of a career dip recently with losses for him over Jeff Neal and Bilal Muhammad. And this, I mean, it has potential to be a good fight, but no real jeopardy, no real meaning to this. Just like your standard fight night card in the Apex, if this is even in the Apex, I'm sure it is. Yeah, it is. It's an Apex card written all over it. And I mean, I know you feel the same at me. We're not going to spend too long here tonight. We'll go through and do the card some due diligence, but not a great one, Harry, really.
This one's tough. Now, before we get into the slagging, we should start by saying, as we've said all the time, sometimes we do have to take a poor card every now and again in order for us to have some of the cards that we've had previously and some of the cards that we'll have in the future. However, this one feels, and it always hits that just that little bit harder when we do have a poor card, because recently we've been so celebratory of the UFC, its matchmaking, and the way in which they're putting these cards together. The problem I think I have for this one, and you already mentioned the word, is jeopardy, right? Like, there is very, very little on this card that makes me feel like divisionally or even from a future perspective that we have got any movers or shakers in this. Now, there are a few fighters that are coming in here that are either debutantes or very, very fresh into the UFC. And so in a couple of years, we may look back and say, oh, fucking hell, do you remember when that fighter fought on this card and we thought it was bad? And actually it was the inception of their, whatever. Potentially. But on paper, and just as a very quick run through that main card, Vicente Luque versus Rafael dos Anjos does nothing for me because it does nothing for either fighter. A win for either of them doesn't really mean anything. Cub Swanson fighting Hakeem Dawodu is just trying to find Cub Swanson a fight at this point. And equally for Dawodu, it's trying to build his name slightly off of Cub Swanson. Khalil Roundtree, Chris Daukaus is a fight that's happening at 205 and means very, very little. Polyana Viana versus Yasmin Lucindo, that's a fine fight, right? It's a decent enough fight at 115. I would have probably put that at co-main event, and then we could have, had a discussion about the ramifications for both those women. And then Tafon and Chukri versus AJ Dobson is just, Christ. Josh Fremd, Jamie Pickett is just to find out who's the worst fighter, really.
Yeah. I can't look at Josh Fremd's last name without going, ooh, friend.
Exactly.
An in-betweeners reference, if anyone doesn't get it.
Reference, yeah. So, I struggle with this card. I struggle with it because I just don't see where we're going to get up for this card, right? I don't see what we're going to merit necessarily from this card, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there will be, even recently when we've called fight cards poor or they've looked poor on paper, they've really delivered it on the night. So
I think when we come here every Thursday and we talk about the card, when we say it's a good card, we say it's a bad card. That's us talking on paper. You know what I mean? This card could have 9, 10, 11 finishes on Saturday night and turn into be a brilliant kind of spectacle from an entertaining point of view. But I mean, it's not going to be entertainment at the highest level. We talked about the entertainment tier system, and I think that we'll kind of put put this in the kind of UFC card tier system as the below tier as the UFC Apex cards that we've seen. It has to be said, less and less this year too, which we talked about the last time out, I believe, as well. That we're kind of happy to see a shift away from those stadium shows. And, coming off UFC Nashville, where, there was a couple of storylines, a couple of prospects there as well. Added addition that it's in a live stadium kind of feels a little bit more special in front of a live crowd as well. We don't have any of that magic this week at all. But let's go into the main event. Let's talk about Vicente Luque and Rafael dos Anjos. And it's been a big fall from grace from Vicente Luque in terms of a guy who liked to go out there and fight on the front foot. But his latest push up the rankings against elite level competition, such as Jeff Neal and Bilal Muhammad, he hasn't just lost barely. He's lost very, very comfortably, really, on both occasions. With Rafael dos Anjos, he's moving up, moving down from lightweight as well. It picked up a good win over Brian Barberin in his last fight. We're seeing him more so rely on his grappling at this stage, but we've seen what he was capable of at this late stage of his career when he went in and took on Rafael Fiziev and was beaten by the younger, obviously more hungrier guy that time. And alas, this is more of an important fight, I feel, for Vicente Luque more so than Rafael dos Anjos, who is basically just fighting for fun and fighting for probably a bit of money as well, of course, at this stage of his career. Can't see him moving too far up the rankings in 170. Can't see him doing the same. And I mean, I guess this has the makings of a fun fight if Luque has kind of come up from that dip, if he's found a new resurgence. But I would fear, even for Vicente Luque here, if he comes in the current form that he has been, that Rafael dos Anjos might have the edge here in this fight. What do you feel is going to happen when these two guys square off on Saturday night?
Sadness.
Yeah.
I have no problem in Vicente Luque or Rafael dos Anjos really, really competing. Both of them are still well able to compete, and neither of them are looking super shot worn. I think for Vicente Luque, he was just never championship quality, and that's fine, right? That's fine. That's totally fine. And again, for Rafael dos Anjos, obviously an elite level fighter in his prime, now knocking on the door of 50 fights. And so we're obviously nowhere near our prime anymore, but I have no problem in these sorts of levels of fights for him. I think, as we stated at the top, my issue with this type of fight is it just doesn't do anything for either man. If Rafael dos Anjos goes out and looks good, he's not on a run to a title shot. He's just not. And in the same vein for Vicente Luque, if he goes out and beats Rafael dos Anjos, that's a fantastic win. It's a fantastic name to have on your resume. But in the same vein, the name doesn't hold the same stock level as it would have, say, 5 years ago, right? And so it's a main event that is put together. It'll be fun because there will be some really flashy, interesting grappling sequences when Rafael dos Anjos tries to take Luque down, pushes him against the fence, does some stuff. But it could also be really sad, right? Where Luque is pushed up against the fence and lands a massive bomb on dos Anjos, and dos Anjos goes down, and we're in these sorts of situations. We know that Luque has a really, really, really slick DOS and a nice anaconda on him. We saw it in a highlight reel against Michael Chiesa. But I don't know. These sorts of fights, especially when they're in the main event of these types of cards, I find personally quite deflating. And I feel like that really is the story in a way of this fight card, is we have another opportunity here to boost a certain level of fighter. And we know that there's scheduling problems and everything else, but we're looking at a main event that usually, as you've already stated, does something divisionally, does something to move the needle. But this one just doesn't for me.
Yeah, definitely falls flat. If we were to talk about Rafael dos Anjos and his career, Harry, how are you looking at him as a fighter coming in? A guy who's been around for the longest time, a guy that's given us probably one of the greatest ever headlines or feature headlines on an article when he came out and proclaimed almost 10 years ago that two people have broke their hands on his face after he got reconstructed jaw surgery. A guy who's been around the block, obviously former lightweight world champion, still doing very, very well to be securing himself into main event positions, no matter if it is on a bad card or not. But I think he's up at the top of this card based off his name value alone and his cult following from many, many years of people watching him fight. Is he a guy that stands out from the pack for you, from what he's been able to achieve in mixed martial arts?
Yeah, I mean, 110%. It feels Rafael to me is one of those guys that truly maximized his potential, truly dedicated his life to being a professional fighter. And what I mean by that is he never came in looking slobby, never came in looking out of shape, was always ripped to shreds, always had a fantastic cardio gas tank, always came in with a game plan, never sort of shied away from any individualistic skill set, always came in well prepared for an MMA fight. And you have to credit him for that. If you look at the people he's losing to, it losses from 2016. Eddie Alvarez, no shame in losing that fight. Tony Ferguson, okay, now you say, well, that's a weird one. But back then, Tony Ferguson was still well able to perform all of 6 years ago. You look at Kamaru Usman, no shame in losing that. Colby Covington, guess what? No shame in losing that either. Loses to the now champion Leon Edwards, fine. Michael Chiesa, okay, that is a weird one. And then you look at Rafael Fiziev, again, that guy's knocking on the door of a title shot sooner rather than later. So there's no shame in losing that either. And you then look at some of the wins he's put together, some absolutely fantastic wins over some absolutely fantastic names. And, I just think the man, again, was somebody that managed to meld the skills of MMA together really, really beautifully. I think we should commend him for that. And I think, unfortunately, we should be asking Rafael dos Anjos what's left for him in fighting sooner rather than later. But if he wants to stay competing at this sort of level, which is the lower end of the top 15, or maybe even just outside the top 15, I have no problem with him doing that until he feels that his skills start to drop off a cliff.
And I've not heard anything from him this week, but he's always looking up. And you have to give him credit for that. He's always looking up, never looking down, never, no talks of retirement. And like you said as well, not putting on Tony Ferguson levels of performances either, Harry, where we're actually watching fights through our hands as well. I mean, to go 5 rounds only 2 fights ago with a guy like Rafael Fiziev, the young hungry guy coming up in the division, even though he didn't have it go his way, still good that he lasted that long. And it only takes one punch though, and that's the fact of the matter. And we'll see what happens with Rafael dos Anjos and Vicente Luque on Saturday night. We'll move on to the co-main event, Harry. And I think the big story coming into this one is the old 135-pound experiment that Cub Swanson tried out. Has been thrown in the garbage bin, and that's a good thing. That's definitely a good thing. That's a bonus to take in to this fight. Having lost to Jonathan Martinez in his last fight via leg kicks, he just looked like his body shut down on that move to 135. And hindsight is a great thing, but we said it was a horrible idea before the fight. We saw it was a horrible idea when the fight went on as well, but gladly he's back up to take on Canada's Hakeem Dawodu at 145. Hakeem, a guy who is also coming off a loss to Julian Erosa, but also a guy who's struggling to kind of kickstart his UFC career somewhat as well. He's made his debut quite a ways back at this stage, but it hasn't been too much activity for the Canadian for one reason or another. Obviously, recent fights and cancellations over Lucas Almeida. He finds himself in a pretty good matchup here, and I think you labeled this fight very correctly when you kind of gave the run through of the main card, and that was the chance for Hakeem to come in here and stake his claim and get his name into brighter lights off the back of someone like Cub Swanson. Would you agree?
Yeah, you mentioned activity there for Dawodu. It feels like activity is a problem in and outside of the cage, really. You know, like
Yeah.
one of the reasons I think why he hasn't and wasn't able to or hasn't been able to thus far to kickstart his UFC career is often because he just doesn't do enough, right? And I think that's the thing that I would like to see him fix in this fight is I want to see him go in, and Cub is a guy who is willing to come forward, willing to stand and trade, and willing to actually have a fight with you, right? And if I'm Dawoodu, I'm grabbing that opportunity with both hands. He hits very hard. He's really, really solid kicker, has a bit of the grappling in terms of defensive grappling in his back pocket. And so this is a fight that if Hakeem Dawodu is going to be anything in this outside 15 of the top 15, then we're going to see it in this one, right? Like I'm not expecting with any great shake that he's going to turn around and start a title run. I think Hakeem Dawodu just isn't that level of fighter, but I think we have an opportunity here with Dawodu to see, is he able to be the gatekeeper for this sort of top 15, because that's just a fine place for him to be. But yeah, I don't really like this fight for Cub Swanson. I fuck weight cutting. We'll just say that one more time. But I just don't. What are we doing? Like, what are we doing? I feel for Cub Swanson, that is like, you've gone and you've had your career, right? You've had it. What are we still doing? Like, if he's coming in for a paycheck, fine, no problem, absolutely fine. Come in, grab your paycheck, and go out. But Dawodu isn't the kind of guy that you accept to fight if you want to get a paycheck.
That's the thing, man. Yeah, that's like, I mean, take a paycheck at what price? And it could be a pretty hefty price as well. Like, because stylistically, this looks a good matchup for Hakeem Dawodu here. Like, he's going to be the longer and the rangier guy coming in here. He's going to be probably pack a little bit more punch in the striking department as well. And he's going to have an opponent in front of him that is really not going to be wanting to take him down. So that's going to give him confidence and opening up on the feet as well. And I mean, it's all of those are all red flags to me heading into this fight for Cub Swanson, really. And I'm sure you feel the same as well.
100%. 100%. Like, the other side of this is, if we see a Cub Swanson unanimous decision, we know exactly who Hakeem Dawodu is, right? And this, if we're looking for positives in this fight, it's that, right? It's that we are going to find out specifically where Hakeem Dawodu is in his career and what his career is likely to be. And we're also going to get to see whether that 135 loss was Cub Swanson's body's reaction to a weight cut, or whether that's where Cub Swanson is right now in his career. And so I think that it's good in the sense that we both get a clearer picture on the ceilings and floors of both fighters. But for a co-main event slot on a fight card, that's not the position that we should be using for that type of thing. So, fair play to both guys. I hope they both get safely through the fight, and I hope they both get paid. But yeah, it's not looking good for me, Chief.
No, absolutely. Let's move on. Where Khalil Roundtree is in his career right now is coming off the back of 3 wins in a row, and he's going to welcome Chris Daukaus into the UFC light heavyweight division. In a particularly strange matchup, because I'm looking at Khalil Roundtree's last 3 wins. Obviously, a win over Modestas Bukauskas, Carl Robinson win, and the Dustin Jacoby split decision last time out as well. And that's a ranked guy. And then you're faced with, Chris Daukaus, who's coming in fresh meat into light heavyweight. It seems like, on paper, at the very least, a step back in terms of, you're getting a win over Dustin Jacoby here. You should be at least getting another ranked opponent within the light heavyweight division. Daukaus himself, 3 defeats in a row. Derek Lewis, Curtis Blades, and Jairzinho Rosen struck by a quick knockout the last time he fought, which probably pushed him towards the light heavyweight division. But he's coming in here against another solid striker in Khalil Roundtree. And I think with Khalil Roundtree, we talk about guys. Sometimes he's a guy that when he's on, he's very dangerous. When he's off, he's still dangerous, but not as enjoys being the hammer, doesn't enjoy being the nail. Looking at this fight, how do you feel about Chris Daukaus? We know your feelings on weight cutting. Daukaus was a guy who was one of those bigger heavyweights. Looked like he did have a little bit of body fat that he could trim down. I'm interested to see what he does look at 205 here. Does it slightly intrigue you at all, this fight?
Sure. I mean, I think it's a tough fight for Chris Daukaus, even on paper. You know, the benefit of having that extra weight is that you can use that mass, right? Well, when you're coming in at 205, and you're right, you know, I hate weight cutting, but there's a difference between a weight cut and there's a difference between just getting yourself in good fighting shape. And I think Chris Daukaus is on the latter side of that, where he's obviously decided that he could be in better shape just physically as a human, and has taken it upon himself to use the impetus of going to a new weight class to sort of spur that motivation on. I have no problem with that whatsoever. Fair play to him. When even when Chris Daukaus is on, right, he's looked decent enough. You go and you destroy Parker Porter. I've done it. I've called him Parker.
How dare you?
Destroy Parker Porter. He's a horrendous fighter. Like, what, we learn nothing. But Rodrigo Nascimento is a solid enough name. If you can go and finish Alexei Olenek, like, that's a big thing. You go and finish Shami. Again, that's a big thing. Shami doesn't get finished, easily. And then you get pushed into the tumble dryer that is Curtis Blades, Derek Lewis, and Jairzinho Rosenstruck. Like, okay, I understand. You're not an elite level heavyweight. That's fine. So there is some intrigue into he's not an elite level heavyweight. What can he do at 205 with the added power that carrying that level of mass can attribute to you? Is he an elite level 205er? Well, this is a good test to find out, right? You chuck him in against Jairzinho, who, you're right, has just come off a win against Dustin Jacoby. You and I are quite high on Dustin Jacoby as a guy that's a really, really good litmus test. If you go out and you blow Dustin Jacoby out the water, you know how to fight. Like, you absolutely know how to fight. Dustin Jacoby is the Neil Magny of the 205 division, where he just does everything well enough. You know, he's not going to light you on fire. He's not going to run for title shots anytime soon, but he is a solid test. And okay, it was a close fight, a contested fight. Fine. Let's not have that conversation again. But Khalil Roundtree gets the nod. Fine. We know he's a good fighter. So it's a nice test, a good test for Chris Daukaus. If Khalil Roundtree goes and blows him out of the water, on the side of Roundtree, it's like, well, that's what you were supposed to do, kind of thing. Guy coming off 3 losses, whatever. But context matters to these fights. And so, I got no problem with the fight specifically. I'm excited for it. Well, that's a different question. But I have no problem with the fight.
Well, I carefully used the term mildly intrigued because, let's not get to, as a guy who is very excitable here and who has gone out on a limb and probably overblown a couple of things and a couple of fighters here on the preview show and other podcasts as well. I chose my words carefully heading into that one. We got some more Brazil versus Brazil action on the main card, 115-pound division. Poliana Viana against Ishman Lucindo. This one, like you said, should be the co-main event. We got 2 prospects here in the 115-pound division, which is spicing up here. Maybe I'll just throw it over straight to you. Why do you feel this should have been maybe labeled the co-main event of this card?
Well, Poliana Viana is a finisher, right? She either gets finished or she finishes fights. And so that's exciting in its own right. Yasmin Lucindo is an interesting prospect in this division at only 21 years of age, right? And so a win over Poliana Viana tells us something. You know, Poliana Viana coming to the end of her career in that she's 31, coming to the end, meaning, she's still got at least a couple of years there, but nowhere near where a Yasmin Lucindo is at 21 years of age. And so this to me is a spotlight fight, right? You put these 2 fighters in who could both do a little something at 115, the A side being Yasmin Lucindo in terms of her potential. But this gives us something to look forward to. It gives us a fighter to start to study, a fighter to go back and watch tape if we haven't already. And then, we get to see the actual thing occurring. We don't know. We know who Hakeem Dawodu is as a in terms of his style, right? Maybe he comes out and shows something a little bit extra in terms of his volume or his gas tank or whatever. But we absolutely know what he's going to bring. And equally, we absolutely know who Cub Swanson is. So we're not going to learn anything drastic there either. But it just, it feels to me as though this is the right fight that you put as the co-main event to highlight one or both of these fighters. But a fun fight because it has ramifications for the division. If Yasmin Lucindo goes out and looks good and lands the bombs that she likes to throw, great. We have a good prospect coming through in that division, and we can start to build on that. If Poliana Viana turns her away, well, okay, we know she has more to learn.
Yeah, Polyana Ivana, she looked good in her last fight against Shin Frey. Knockout in the first round. That came after a loss to Tabitha Ritchie. So, I'd be looking at this, maybe that experience in there with, higher level opponents for Polyana Viana might play her dividends here. But it's a good litmus test, as you said, for Ishman Deshindo, because she's young. She's got plenty of time to grow. At 21, Harry, 14-5. That's a crazy amount of fights for a 21-year-old. So, you know, I don't know. I don't like seeing fighters, I do praise it at times, but it's also worrying that, how long or how much damage have you already put your body through at such a young age. It'll be interesting to see what's that. Also on the main card, 185, Harry, Tafon and Chukwi versus AJ Dobson. I mean, I don't know
Who
about.
goes home first?
Yeah, it's like, is this maybe one of the worst fights that has ever been placed on main card fight night? It might possibly be, because both guys are coming off defeats, I believe.
Three
Um,
fight,
three
three
fights
fights.
and two fights. So two fight losing streak for AJ Dobson,
Yeah.
3 fight losing streak from Tafron and Chukwi, and yeah, this is getting the main card treatment, and I don't know. I don't get this booking at all, really, to be honest. You're looking at the card here, and there's plenty more fights I'm looking at here that you could put on the main card. It
Yeah.
seems pretty baffling that the UFC have chosen this as a main card filler, really, hasn't it? That's about as much as we can say about this fight.
Yeah, I mean, like, to me, you usually have a big meaty men doing big meaty men things on a main card. So Martin Bidet versus Josh Parisian probably takes that slot, right? And then if you want to, I mean, Damone Blackshear is a good fighter, right? Why if we need somebody on a main card that's not fucking Josh Fremd and Jamie Pickett or Tafon and Chukwi versus AJ Dobson, I'd put that fight on there, right? I'd have no problem necessarily putting Montserrat Ruiz on there. Terrence McKinney, okay, a late notice replacement for Mike Breeden. That could be bumped up to a main card. Or we know Marcus McGee's going to bring a fight. We know JP Buys is going to bring a fight. Why is that not opening a main card? But
Yeah, like give one of these guys like Marcus McGee or somebody like that, who's a guy who has a chance of maybe, he's recently come into the UFC, look good. Like, I know it'll probably mean the world to him I know, and he's getting he's listed as the prelims headliner slot here. It might not always be that way, but you know, that's the thing that annoys me and frustrates me, and I don't have an understanding of it. I'd love to ask why that fight in that particular spot when we're not highlighting a guy on the prelims that should be highlighted, because these two guys are not going to be in the UFC probably next year. I would say that both of them will probably find their way, because as soon as they start moving up the divisions, they're going to start eating more defeats as well. So I mean, the same can be said. We'll move on, and in the 185-pound division, I think it tells the story on the state of the division right now. Harry, Josh Fremd, Jamie Pickett will open up the main card, so double middleweight action for us. Josh Fremd coming in after his last win over Cedric Dumas, and Jamie Pickett himself recently has picked up 3 losses in a row. So he's pretty much fighting for his job here after a pretty one-sided beatdown by Bo Nickel last time out. And I think it tells its own story. I think if you're known for because you're a guy that lost to Bo Nickel, it tells its own story here, doesn't it?
horrendous, both of them. Long standing, I said that Jamie Pickett shouldn't be in the UFC, like 13-9, not a record that's UFC worthy unless you're, adding 20 fights on either side to that. Josh Fremd, not great either, not great. Neither of these guys, in my opinion, are what I would determine to be UFC caliber. Fair play. Look, they've got fights. They've taken them. They've signed a contract on the dotted line. They put the time in. They're going to go and earn their money. Fair play. But yeah, this is a rough one. Like, remember, main cards. I don't mean you. I mean the audience. Main cards are there. The first fight on a main card is really pivotal, right?
Sure
And it's
is, yeah.
really pivotal because it sets the tone for the thing that everyone's then going to be really wanting to watch, right?
Yeah, like I'm really romantic on how I view a card structure, because it's always like the way I used to look at, even like before I started MMA, even with boxing, it was that slow build where every fight needs to have that little bit more and more meaning as you're going up the card. Obviously, with your co-main event, it might be a title shot, might be a number one contendership fight, and your main event, which, you know, obviously in pay-per-views will have title fights or even have two ranked guys at the very least, that, you know. But I feel that with the new structure of how UFC cards are laid out, that kind of magic and that kind of nostalgia of building a card into fruition is kind of gone by the wayside a little bit, isn't it?
It feels like that in some cards for sure. And especially in this one where, you know, I'm similarly romantic to card placements as you are. And I look at this fight card or look at this specific fight placement and, you know, let's say you've gotten in from work or you've put the kids to bed and you've managed to, you know, unfortunately you've missed all the prelims. And the first fight you lock into of a 5-fight main card is you're like, okay, cool. Let me lock into this. This is the sales pitch for the rest of my night. And it's Josh Fremd and Jamie Pickett. Like, if that's not a sad balloon noise, I don't really know what is.
That's
you know,
you could have coined a new phrase there for any dirt fight. A
sad
balloon noise fight.
Yeah, fucking hell. Like,
Christ.
It's raw. This one's raw. Like,
right, let's move on. Marcus McGee, a guy that we did mention, came in, a little bit of hype under his name after his first fight, picked up a good win over Journey Newsom, rear naked choke in round 2. He's coming in to take on JP Boys. Favorable enough matchup for him here as well. JP Boys, 3 losses in a row. We're starting to get a bit of a trend here with these fights. You know, massive losing streaks instead of massive winning streaks here on this card. But this is a fight, you know, a guy against JP Boys for Marcus McGee, where he can come in and kind of further stake his claim, and perform in the featherweight division, kind of move up the rankings. He's getting a little bit of spotlight this week as well. And I think, yeah, it's a good opportunity really on the prelims headliner, if it is actually on the prelims headliner, for him to come in, beat JP Pies, move on to the next one, and that's about it really with this fight, isn't it?
Yeah, it feels to me like they know Marcus McGee at 33 years of age is probably not going to be on his way to a title shot. But what it feels like they're doing is they're going to squeeze the juice out of that first hype train as much as they can. And, you know, this is the prelim headliner, and they've got this one right, I think. Of all of the fight placements, I feel like this is a fight that I am more than happy to see as the main event of the prelims, because Marcus McGee has a no-nonsense style. He wants to come in, he wants to throw hands, he wants to grapple, he wants to get finishes. And JP Buys likes to get finished. So, you know, this is a fight where one of the fighters is absolutely going to try and win this fight. I know that sounds very silly, but they're going to try and win it definitively, and they're going to try and win it with a finish. And I think they've teed this up, as you've rightly said, to try and get Marcus McGee another win, and then whatever happens, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Not too much more to say about that. Let's talk Terrence McKinney, who's coming in to take on Mike Breeden at short notice again. And we're dealt with this kind of decision making that Terrence McKinney makes inside and outside the octagon, Harry, where, you know, I do feel there's the core of a good fighter there with McKinney, but he keeps on getting in his own way. Obviously fancies his chances coming in here against Mike Breeden, but it's a big fight for him. 3 losses in his last 4 fights, 2 losses in a row, coming off a defeat only last month. So he'll fight less than a month's time. He lost by rear naked choke against Nazim Sadikov, and lost. Well, he won the first round, but then lost pretty convincingly in round 2. Is he taking a big chance coming in here against Mike Breeden? Do you think it's a wise move to try maybe nullify that? Breeden himself, I mean, yeah, losing streaks galore here, is coming in off a 2-fight losing streak. I think McKinney, I would like to think, is coming in here with the thoughts that, you know, I'm better than this guy. Even if it's just a month, it's likely he got straight back to the gym after that defeat from Sadikov, stayed in shape, accepted this fight, and is looking to kind of erase that win streak here. And I guess you can say the same about Breeden. He's coming in here. He's glad to get the chance to snap a 2-fight losing streak. But one of the two of these gentlemen is going to come out, unless it's a draw on a 3-fight losing streak here. and it'll be interesting to see what happens. Thoughts on Terence McKinney and what I was saying about him as a fighter and his decision making and kind of coming in and taking this fight at short notice, because on paper it might look good, doesn't always work out that way.
I think for me, the question actually is of the UFC. Like, okay, Mike Breeden's opponent pulls out, Lando Venata, right? Whatever, pulls out, whatever. These things happen in MMA. Do we really need to keep Mike Breeden on the card? Like, if he wants to compete and Lando Venata, let's say Venata can do 2 weeks time, do we have to keep that card? Do we have to pull in Terence McKinney on 5 days?
They probably do, to probably try and get him off the fucking roster altogether, if we're being honest. I think that's the plan here, because you hold off and then you have him there. It's an extra guy that you have on the roster. We're in the midst of Dana White Contender Series season. Dana giving out contracts like Oprah Winfrey there on Tuesday nights now, and he needs to clear some room in the roster. So what we're going to see over the course of the next couple of weeks is lots of people in and lots of people out. And I feel, maybe to answer your question and how I rudely interrupted you, is I feel that they offer this to Terence McKinney to go in there and do their dirty work for them. Maybe possibly go in there, get a win, get Mike Breeden off the roster. Terence McKinney gets back in the win column, and they can go and market that for his next fight.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, look, for Terence McKinney, if he comes in here and loses to Mike Breeden, then forget the hype train that
he's gone then. Yeah,
probably, because
he could be like,
you're Terence McKinney. Okay, you're not demanding a vast wage, right? But you're probably earning more than 10 and 10. You're probably earning more than 12 and 12, like,
for sure, at the rate that he's fighting at as well,
Exactly. And so if you're the UFC and he goes out and drops 3 in a row, you best believe they're going to try and get rid of that as much as possible. And if they push him out and he goes to an LFA or a CFFC or wherever it is he goes, wins back a title and demands his place back in the UFC, well, they can renegotiate again on a contract that's probably nowhere near what he was on in the first place. So, it's a win-win as always for the UFC, but I would be expecting that Terence McKinney goes out and does Terence McKinney things here and picks up a win against Mike Breeden.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to the next one, because I'm looking forward to seeing Francis Fire Marshall come back after his first career loss to William Gomis. He takes on Isaac Dulgarian. I'm always intrigued to see how a fighter comes back after a loss, but especially after the first loss of his career. He's coming in against a new UFC debutant in Isaac Dulgarian, who's 5-0, and I guess 5-0, 5 finishes, but we'll see if it is too big of a step too soon in his early career. UFC have kind of come in and they are making these kind of signings. It's proven you're going to have to be ready after 5 fights to get into the UFC. That wouldn't have even been an idea, to be honest, probably 10 years ago. But look, here we are. This is what's happening, and we have a chance to see Francis Marshall against some fresh blood coming in the lightweight division. Are you looking forward to seeing Francis go at it?
Yeah, I mean, for the similar reason that you are, but I equally agree that this is an insane fight, really. Like in the set, and I mean, look, we've seen Bo Nickel come in with less fights, but I look at this, and you'll remember, because you've been in this game a long time, that you used to have people turned away from Tough because they had less than 10 fights, right?
100%.
And it's like, we just need you to have a little bit more experience, go out on the regional scene, get a couple more fights, and then come back to us and we'll see. Fine. Now we've got a fella that's coming in on 5 fights, less than half of 10, and we're seeing an entrance into the UFC. So, to our point before about the degradation of the UFC brand, the UFC name, at least at the entrance level, I think this supports that argument. Now, Isaac Dulgarian could come in and be an absolute world beater, right? But we won't know until he's there. But yeah, it's a fight. It's happening. And let's see.
Yeah, and the next one is happening too in the heavyweight division. That's Martin Buday versus Josh Parisian, and that's the first arm wave for anyone who's listening on that Harry is given tonight. Yeah, this one doesn't really tickle the fancy for me. Like, I mean, two bog standard heavyweights that are not going to do too much in the division. And we'll see. At least it's not at least it's not third fight from the top anyway. At least we made that jump up in class. Let's talk about a little bit real quickly. I'm going to wrap this up. We don't have to spend too much on these last couple of ones, Harry. Montserrat Ruiz coming in against Jacqueline Amaromriam. Amanda Lemos was the last person to take on Montserrat Ruiz, and she defeated her. So it's a kind of a jump down in class, if you want to call it, and something like that, against Jacqueline Amorium in this fight here in 115 pounds in the strawweight division. Montserrat Ruiz, do you think she'll learn quite a bit? It's her chance for kind of redemption. She'll want to go in there, get a win, and put herself back in the mix at 115. Coming off, 3 or 2-1 in her last 3. How do you fancy her as a fighter, really?
I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard one. That's why I couldn't even shape the question because I didn't know what way to ask. I was just like, what do we think here?
Look, you go from Cheyenne Valismas, who's a 7-2 fighter at the time, and then you get chucked in against Amanda Lemos.
Yeah, big jump there.
That's an insane jump in class. Like in the fight against Valismas, nothing said to me, we're going to the moon. Chuck her in right fucking now. We need to find out. Nothing showed me that. So to go immediately into an Amanda Lemos, who was knocking on the door of a fucking title shot soon, like not so long ago, it seemed like a rocket to the moon. So I don't know is the honest answer. And I think that the fight against Jacqueline Amorim, who, goes out, loses her UFC debut to Sam Hughes, who's a tough, gritty grappler. We're gonna find out, like Sam Hughes isn't a fantastic fighter by any stretch of the imagination. But is a gatekeeper, right? You know what you're getting. You're getting lots of takedowns. You're getting a lot of grit. You're getting a lot of grind. So both of these women, I think we get to learn a little bit more about when we watch this fight. But I really can't tell you what I think of either of them as a fighter based off a very quick knockout to Amanda Lemos and a 3-round decision against Valismas, and then equally a loss to Sam Hughes. So we'll see.
Yep, Damon Blackshear comes in at 135 at short notice to take on Jose Johnson. With Blackshear, I've been impressed with what I've seen so far. Obviously, things didn't go his way against Farid Basharat, but we know how good the Basharat brothers are. Picked up a good win in the second round against Luan Lacerda in his last fight, coming in against Jose Johnson, who himself is on a 3-fight win streak after wins over Mo Miller, Giuliani Perry, and Jack Cartwright. And I'm going to hand it over to you before I have to cough down the microphone.
So Damon Blackshear, like in his loss to Farid Basharat, who obviously we are quite high on, this is immediately after Farid said he's a better fighter than you think he is, right? And don't let it slip that he is a really, really, really solid test. I mean, you have a loss to Danny Sabatello on your record. These things happen in MMA, but wins over Mike Kimball in Bellator is a very, very good win. The draw against Yusuf Salal, we've talked about Yusuf Salal on this podcast before. A loss to Chris Matinho, we know how tough that dude is, and then a loss back in CFFC to Pat Sabatini, who again both of us are relatively high on for that sort of just outside of the top 15 guys. So, we're coming in here. I think the thing for Blackshear is I just need to see him get moving now. Let's see if we can have 3 fights in a year. We had the Basharat fight, we had the Luan Lacerda fight. Brady Haidstand fell out, and now we've got this one. So let's see what this era brings. If we end the year on 2-1, that's a good year, and we roll into 2024 with something a little bit extra. But if he can go out here and put it on Jose Johnson and get a finish, let me see him get back in, and let me see him improve again. I really want to see him start to kick on in his career now.
Absolutely. First fight, we won't spend too much long on it. That's Juliana Miller. She's coming off an absolutely horrific performance against Veronica Hardy. She'll take on Luana Santos in the strawweight division, who's coming off a 2-fight win streak. And I mean, not too much to say about this. I mean, Juliana Miller, she was absolutely dreadful in her last fight. Luana Santos, 23 years of age too, so two young up and coming prospects. Crazy to me, Harry. With all due respect to Juliana, that's an Ultimate Fighter winner that we're looking at there. Do you know what I mean? And she looked to take a massive jump back in class against Veronica Hardy, and Veronica Hardy herself is also a very good fighter who had been on the shelf for quite some time, but yeah, not looking good. And, it could be a quick UFC stint for Juliana Miller if she doesn't turn things around.
Yeah, I mean, it feels to me like the UFC again have set up a win-win performance. If Juliana Miller goes out and beats Luana Santos, well, you can turn around and say, oh, look, tough winner. She's turning things around. She's improving. She's doing things. Yay, good for us. And then the flip side exists just as much, right? If Luana Santos goes out and just decimates Juliana Miller in any way, shape, or form like Veronica Hardy did, then you're like, she has a win over a tough winner, and this is the new budding star. She's 23 years of age, blah, 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 blah. So, yeah, I mean, it's a fight. It'll happen. It'll open the card. I hope, for all things considered, that we have some interesting prospect in Luana Santos. She took a loss against Jenna Bishop. Jenna Bishop is a very, 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 very good grappler. And so these things do happen in MMA. But yeah, look, we'll see.
Not if you're fucking the mighty Rug, because Senegalese wrestling is the main base to come into mixed martial arts. Walked out with submissions against Buchecha. So get on it, kids. Senegalese wrestling, never mind your jiu-jitsu. That's what you need to do. And that's it for this preview show. 13 fights as Harry buries his head in his hands at my blatant disrespect towards the art of Brazilian jiu-jitsu. But we'll do that on this podcast time and time again. I hope you all enjoy the fights. Go and follow Harry at BJJ_Harry Powell on Instagram, on Twitter. Check out his great instructional videos on there as well, doing some great stuff. O'Neill MMA is where you'll get me. Enjoy the fights for what they are on Saturday night. We'll be back next week to break them down, and we will talk to you then. Take care, good luck, and God bless.